everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. On behalf of Clancy&Theys Construction Company and Lantz-Boggio, we welcome you to today's discussion about effectively managing the design and construction processes to keep your projects on track. For today's session, introduction to our speakers, and also provide you with some brief background information on each of our firms. Following that introduction, our goal for today is to walk you through what we believe are the key concepts for you as an owner to understand and expect from your team during the design and pre-construction processes of a project. After we have walked you through that discussion, we would like to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes providing you with current trends in the marketplace and how COVID is affecting both design elements and construction pricing. While not originally planned as part of this session, we decided that this could be very helpful information for many of you, considering all that has transpired this year. We hope you find the information valuable, and our team will be available at the conclusion of the presentation to address any questions that you may have. And now we will begin with an introduction to our teams. My name is Jeff Mock, and I serve as Vice President in the Florida Division for Clancy&Theys. I've worked with Clancy&Theys for the past 25 years, oversight on a lot of our senior living communities from a project management perspective, and very happy to have worked alongside of Bill Zecker, my counterpart, for all 25 of those years we've been together.
And I'm Bill Zecker. I also have worked with Clancy&Theys now for 25 years. So Jeff and I have had the opportunity to work together during all those time. I lead our pre-construction efforts here in the Orlando office for all of our Florida opportunity of work that we do, and look forward to having an opportunity to discuss your projects that you have.
Clancy&Theys was founded in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1949 by E.I. Clancy and Johnny Theys, who were brother-in-laws, and we remain a private family-owned business today. Throughout the years, we've expanded across the Southeast and currently have 5 offices, including our office here in Florida. We have a very long-standing relationship with both our bonding and insurance firms and remain very financially strong. Our Florida division has been in operation for over 30 years, and we are proud of our list of long-standing clients, some of which date back over 25 years ago. We have a particular focus on senior living facility construction and renovations in Florida and have worked on hundreds of active campus environments. Clancy&Theys has been building senior living communities for over 30 years and has several projects either in pre-construction or under construction now. Currently, under construction here in Orlando, we're building phase 2 of the Baldwin Park community for Westminster Communities of Florida. This project includes 3 new 5-story independent living buildings that will add 75 new units to this beautiful campus. Currently in pre-construction, but planned to break ground in just a couple of months, is an expansion to the Cardinal in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is a new 18-story independent living and assisted living tower for Kisco Senior Living out of California. Regarding some of our previously completed projects, La Posada, pictured here in the top left, is an active life plan community in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Our team completed 2 additions, including a 56-unit independent living building and a new wellness building, as well as multiple campus renovations. The second project worth pointing out is the Overture, located in Virginia Beach, a very large active senior adult community built along the shores of the Chesapeake Bay.
Thank you, Jeff. This is David Fick with Lantz-Boggio Architects. I'm the president of Lantz-Boggio Architects and Interior Designers. Great to be a part of this team. And we're a national senior living architecture firm that has projects within the state of Florida. Currently, there's about 7 projects. We've recently completed around 20 projects with a total of 23 overall during our history. We've been around for 40 years. And we now have an office in Florida. We focus primarily on senior living with almost 90% of our work in senior living market. We have around 50 employees, 35 of them are architects, and we also have 8 interior designers and procurement staff. Currently, we hold the first place award for the skilled nursing project in Celebration. Previously, we won the year before for a project in Tavares called Fountain Inn. As we mentioned, we are currently doing a lot of work in Florida. Our office that is located in South Florida is run by Todd Anthony. I myself was a resident of Florida for 27 years before joining Lantz-Boggio Architects, and at which time 7 years ago I moved to Colorado. However, I have many years of experience doing senior living in the state of Florida. And I'd like to introduce Todd Anthony, who is our director of the Florida office and a project manager.
Thank you, David. Yep, as noted, I'm Todd Anthony. I manage the Florida office in Fort Lauderdale. I've been in Florida my entire life. It's been great to join Lantz-Boggio recently, and we've got many of our staff members with experience in the state. So a couple of the highlights: Jim Ballinger, our director of our design team, has 18 years of Florida experience, as well as Bill Foster, senior associate, and heads our business development team. He has around 8 years of Florida experience. So between David, myself, Jim, and Bill, we're about 75 years total of Florida experience, and which will go a long way to help our achieve what our clients' goals are.
So what are we here to talk about today? Well, I believe it's about being prepared and how to make sure that we can offer assistance in being your teammate or showing you ways that you can be on time and on budget for your project. I think of it in a way of if you were to jump out of an airplane without a parachute on. If you were told you're going to be going out and you're going to be skydiving today, I think you'd be learning as much as you could before you'd jump out of that airplane. You'd make sure you'd know where you're going to be at the most simple, but you might want to know who's going to be flying the plane, who's going to be the person that is that you're jumping with. They'll probably give you some kind of instructional video. And most importantly, you're going to make sure that you want to have a parachute on. And that way you can actually enjoy the flight. This is something similar to that we're going to be talking about today. What are the things that you can do to make sure you have a parachute on before jumping into your project? We're going to be covering several different topics today, and this will be a good conversation between Clancy&Theys and Lantz-Boggio architects. We're first going to talk about communication and how important it is to enhance the communication between the design team and the ownership team. The design team has a lot of communication that is best understood and best followed by each design team member, from consultants that are provided by the architect or consultants that are on the ownership team. But the design team should definitely be a good listener. They should be somebody that is going to listen to the feedback that they're receiving and make sure that they follow within the guidelines that they're instructed. You should also understand your client's mission. A mission is very important. Sometimes a design team may go astray and lead down a road which could end up taking longer to process or actually become more costly. We also believe in creating a single point of contact on the design team side, which typically is the architect. The architect should always be enforcing and allowing the owner to provide feedback that is instructional to the entire team. And from that point, the architect's goal with their consultants is to present solutions. The owner communication can be improved by providing honest communication to the team. Both internally, they can determine what it is that they feel is the most important and then communicate that to the design team. Providing timely answers can also reduce costs. Give you an example that when you have the opportunity and the design team is looking for some information, if the information is not provided, it could slow down the process. For instance, if it is soil boring tests, things like that are needed up front, or as simple as how many people they're anticipating to use a room. And then lastly, on the ownership side, is to understand the internal communication, whether or not you want the feedback from resident council, or whether or not it is important for the marketing department to be on all decisions. To give you an example, these are 3 different drawings that we produced simultaneously, and the ownership came back immediately giving us the go-ahead on the plan on the far right. This allowed us to develop this plan immediately and move forward and cut out a lot of time during the design.
And one of the other elements that's important here as well, David, is your pre-construction team to be able to provide information timely back to the design team and the ownership so those decisions are being made appropriately. As part of the collaborative pre-construction process, it's important to select your construction management team as early as possible. As part of making that decision, it's allowing the design team to receive feedback early and timely so that as the design is advancing, it's advancing with the correct information moving forward. One of the things that we do, and one of the things that you should ensure that your construction manager is doing, is in the early stages of design, is to make sure that they are providing a lot of their own detailed takeoffs. And why that's important is to ensure that all costs or all elements of the project are being captured at the same time. We utilize a comprehensive database with historical cost information so that we can then provide that information back immediately to the design team and the ownership team, again, so that the correct decisions are being made from day one and as the process moves forward. This is the pre-construction process at which we use. First, it's obviously identifying the program and working with the ownership to understand the overall program budget, both for construction and the overall project cost. Working together with the design team as the design is being developed, we're always providing costing information. Just as I mentioned, as related to that skin of the building, is to be able to provide that information so that the decisions being made appropriately, both from a cost, aesthetics point of view, along with at the different stages of the design, providing detailed estimates that are being then reviewed with the entire team before we advance into the next design element. And then finally, obviously, is developing the final GMP, along with monitoring the costs through the construction process. One of the software components that we utilize during the takeoff process is called on-screen takeoff. And as you can see here, it's illustrating, it's highlighting out information so that we can then share that information quickly with the design team and or ownership to show them the various components as we've taken them off and as we understand the project. One of the other benefits it does is it allows us to isolate areas and look at things from an individual component, such as this little piece of a parking lot. So we could analyze that component and provide the cost associated with it individually. It's a very detailed program. So as you can see here, it's looking at the exterior skin of a building, and it's quantifying all of our components as the project is being developed, and as it's being changed, we can quickly go back in and modify these elements in an overlay function that we have. Again, as I mentioned, we use a database that's made up of over 10,000 line items, and the benefit associated with that, it allows us to go through and do all of our own takeoff in a very detailed fashion, and then being able to make adjustments accordingly. So as you can see here, it's just showing you the various elements within our site work side of the database. You know, from example of from a cut to fill to a cut to stockpile to cut to haul off. And it's all cost history. So it allows us to quickly go in and put quantities in and adjust quantities accordingly as the project is developed. So again, the key takeaways from this process is to ensure that you've selected your team early, so that you can ensure that the project stays on budget and on time, making sure that the team is delivering on all of those elements that we discussed so that early decisions are being made, because that's where you affect the project from a cost perspective the most, by making those decisions early versus later in the design process.
That's excellent information. And as an architect, what you just heard is extremely valuable to our team. There's nothing more rewarding to us than to know that we're still on budget at each phase, rather than finding out at the end of construction documents that we still have to do some work in order to get this under budget. Just because of the flexibility of what's happening in the industry these days, having a contractor involved early is very important. So I'd like to talk about finding the right team. And in any event that we're looking for the right team, it's going to include the consultants. And in Florida, it's imperative that we do find the right consultants.
That's right, David. We typically, you want to have people that on your team that have experience in the state you're working in. It certainly goes a long way. With Florida, you know, it's kind of a unique animal. Humidity, which affects your mechanical systems. You've got windstorms, which your structural engineer needs to be, very on point with design-wise. And you also have your civil engineering. We've got low water tables, or high water tables, I should say. And, there's a lot of things that go into Florida projects that you may not have to deal with in other states. And having the right team, going back to that key phrase, is key here. And you can, rely on your architect to help, with the selections and guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, I would like to echo on that as well. We've actually had the opportunity to work with, other design groups that did not do some of the things that you've just heard, and brought in an outside consultant from, example, a mechanical engineer from a different marketplace. And unfortunately, here in the Florida market, with the humidity and other things that we deal with, the system ended up being designed incorrectly, and we had to go back in and make a fairly substantial modification near the end of design after we had a peer review done.
We just mentioned briefly about how important it is to bring the contractor in early, and you could see what Clancy&Theys was showing there, how important when each little move that the architect makes is they're keeping track of those and suggesting whether or not a change is going to be beneficial to the design cost-wise, or whether it's going to add cost. And by keeping a running tab on that, we're able to make course corrections a lot earlier, therefore staying on task time-wise, as well as staying on task cost-wise. Having the right experience means more than just having experience. It means that you've done more than just a few senior living projects, and even more than just a few senior living projects in Florida, as you heard. Whenever you're doing senior living, that it's only a multifamily project, but in reality, it's a lot more complex. Architects that do senior living need to know how to do full commercial laundries, full restaurants with commercial kitchens, fitness centers, and the like. So it's a lot more complex than doing a standard multifamily project. And what happens within the floor ceiling assembly is a lot more complex than what happens in multifamily. Next, we'd like to talk about design changes. Design changes are something that will add up immediately, from just the simplicity of how many turns happen in the building to what happens in the programming. This chart that we're going to show here has been developed over time, and this is our own take on how the process works. This orange line represents the ability to affect the costs throughout the changes. When you look at the bottom, you can see the different phases from concept design, schematic design, all the way through construction. And this orange line represents how at the beginning of the process, you can make changes and it's not going to really affect the cost. As a matter of fact, you can make a lot of decisions up front, and with the partnership of a contractor early on, you can maintain those costs accurately. The next line shows what happens the later you wait to make a change. The red line is representing the cost of the design change. So about at the beginning of design documentation, you're going to start to see things that affect the costs. Those effects include the quality of the documentation. So as a change is made, you can see that through design documentation that it actually still stays at a high level. But the more you make changes during construction documents, the quality goes down. And part of that reason is that you see that the consultant coordination effort is very high early on and all the way through construction documentation. And if a design change occurs during construction documents, what will happen is the quality of the documents go down because we do not have the appropriate coordination time. Likewise, the amount of drafting that occurs during the process starts in schematic design and ramps up. By the time you get to the end of construction documentation, it is expected that the drafting or drawing portion is complete. There may be some that occurs during bidding and permitting in order to clarify some of the decisions that were made. Another advantage to having a contractor on early is that they've seen all these changes that occurred. Whereas when you bring somebody on at the end of construction documents, they now need to learn how to put this building together from that point versus having months and months of knowledge all the way through the process. Including the key stakeholders is very important. What you'll find is that that previous version to this version, by not having the correct stakeholders on board, caused us to do a complete design change to the exterior during design development. It was about 80% complete in DDs when the design changed. At that point, we realized that there would need to be an ed service. So anytime that you can have any of these key stakeholders on board early on will definitely save time and money for your team. A couple that I have at the end here is the resident council. That is sometimes a benefit where if you have somebody from your resident committee that is on the board of stakeholders, if they're forward thinking, they can then add into the discussion with the rest of the community. They can actually add excitement and enthusiasm and therefore create a momentum that they do want the change. At other times, resident councils could slow the process down. So it's very important to know your resident team and therefore bring them on. Another point is aesthetics. Sometimes as part of the team, the aesthetics is going to be very important to some stakeholders, and at other times it is not. And it's important to identify who is going to be making those decisions. Having the key stakeholders on board early will eliminate a lot of redundancy and a lot of extra meetings. Therefore, if they're part of each meeting, the decisions can be made quickly. Using charrettes as a tool to work with that committee of stakeholders, you can see that these are some of our early process drawings that start out by hand as just analysis of the site. Both of these were of a project where it was an existing campus, and we were working with the campus in order to expand and reposition. Eventually, as the project was completed, it went off a lot smoother because a lot of the questions were answered early on. Conducting a market study is very important prior to the start of the project as well. Although that might seem simple, it's also important to convey this information to the design team so they can assist you in everything from unit types, unit mix, square footage of units, and etc. That'll also help you to determine your program. Here's a project where in the upper right-hand corner here is an administration office. It was important to this particular developer and operator that this was not separate offices, but it operated more like a WeWork system. That led us to be able to create this program early versus making changes throughout the documentation, and the contractor was able to identify the fact that we were reducing some costs by eliminating doors, walls, etc. So I want to open this up also to the whole team here as we're talking about exclusions. Exclusions can make the project seem like it's on budget, but after you add the exclusions in, it can go over budget. For example, here, if we were to be told, well, they did not include the ceiling material and that they provided a balance of X $1,000 only to come to find out that that was 2X, it could add up very quickly if you're not watching the exclusions and if your design team is not watching those exclusions.
Yes, David, and I agree with you on that. I mean, one of the things, again, from your construction management group that you should expect is as the design's being developed, you know, providing that feedback during that process is so helpful to the design team to make sure that they understand things that are maybe having to be qualified in such a way that could be a detriment to the project at a later date when things are figured out. So one of the things that I would recommend as the process is advancing forward, having a good, clear understanding of items like that could be being excluded, could be made into an allowance. Again, those are things that can come back later in the design process to become very costly, and then also have an impact to the time associated with the project. So when we get to the end of the design development and into the GMP side of things, we try to eliminate as many qualifications as possible to prevent those things from happening.
And in doing so, that could end up skewing the comparison of apples to apples. And it's very important to note that somebody that is as thorough as Clancy&Theys as they're working through their estimation, somebody else may not, and may come in seemingly less expensive when in reality could end up costing even more money. I'd like to also talk about contingency and the understanding that contingency is held on both the contractor and ownership side, but not on the design team side. And that contingency is truly meant for a multitude of things. And for the design team, there may be 20 to 30 different people working on the project, from all the different consultants to designers, quality assurance, et cetera. But whenever you're dealing with perhaps 24 people, there's a possibility of a mistake that does occur. Those mistakes that may occur in the field is something that contingency covers.
Yeah, David, I agree with this as well. One of the things that's critical during the course of the design is obviously having different levels of contingency. So earlier in the design process, we would recommend a higher contingency value until we get to a final documentation and GMP development, which may be smaller. However, we would recommend to any of our clients to carry not only a owner kind of contingency, but also contractor contingency and a separate design contingency to allow for things as such that David has mentioned.
And I think contingencies, when you're dealing with non-for-profits, as many of you are in our audience, it's extremely important when you're getting your funding from a board of directors and you're trying to budget for a project. If you do have the right contingency, that could avoid lengthy delays with getting reapproval for additional funds. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So we've identified scope creep and budget creep, but there's something that I call schedule creep. Schedule creep is something that does occur, and it does cost money. Anytime that a schedule is delayed and a schedule on the design team for whatever reason may be pushed farther out, that ends up pushing your occupancy date farther out. And every day that you do not have somebody moving into your building does cost money. So we want to talk about a couple of things. One being accurate information. We've talked a lot about how to have that accurate information up front. Mentioned I have a story about a soil boring that we did not receive soil boring tests until the end of design development, and that severely impacted structural's ability to design the building, therefore costing time. And although the cost did not go up, the time did. And that does cost money for ownership and developers, operators, et cetera, because they're at the end date, although it may seem, well, it'll open up at some point, every day again that's not open does cost money. Secondly, accurate documentation. This falls on the design team's shoulders, where we need to be as accurate as possible. And that, for the most part, that's for providing the contractor with the most streamlined and smooth process. I know there's always this desire to get the documentation done quick. In doing so, though, it could end up costing money because of the delays and the change orders that could occur in the field. I was asked at one point during a project, and I had a very open relationship with this owner, and they asked me, what would I do differently? And I said, the only thing I would do differently is I would ask for more time. And that the purpose is that when changes are made during construction documents and the quality is going down and the speed and the milestone date to complete and go in for permit does not move, what happens is quality goes down, quality assurance is lacking, coordination with consultants is lacking, and therefore the possibility of somebody asking for more time occurs anyhow. We just ran through several different processes that takes place on the front end even before the design starts, the design documentation starts. And so thought it would be helpful to give the audience a little bit of an idea of how the process works for both the design team, the architects, as well as the contractor, and what you may expect leading up to the documentation phase. What you see many times is a diagram that the architect will put together as just a feasibility study where we're asked if we can fit a certain amount of units. In this case, it was 90 living units, and it had independent living, and then there was additional 40 assisted living and 20 memory care. And so we were asked if we could fit this in on this site with this parking, and it had some unique conditions with different entrances and so forth. And many times we'll do this as a pro bono offer to the client because they don't know whether or not this is actually going to work. And we're all about making sure that everybody's comfortable. So we'll lay out something like this and may not hear again from the client for maybe 3 months or so. So I was just wondering, Jeff and Bill, if we were to give you something like this, where would you take it at this point, even before we're starting the design?
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, one of the things that we as well obviously want to help the clients when they're in their early stages of a project. So we would as well provide, rough order of magnitude estimates like this at no cost. What we would do with this information is we would do an evaluation of the overall square footage that's evaluated or associated with the project. And then we would apply large unit cost to it. In other words, the overall gross square footage cost to that based upon cost history for the product type. Because of various things at site, we would do some takeoff of some, quantities of hardscapes and some landscape areas, because those have variables that are a little different from project to project. So we could then assign cost associated to those as well, so that we can give you an accurate budget off of a very rough information to get at least a pro forma developed from.
Well, that's great. From this point, the both of us might not hear back from the client for a while as they're trying to decide whether or not this is going to work and whether or not they need to size it differently. So the next step many times for us will be after they come back and they do say, let's move forward, and they may reduce the count or add to the count. So we'll look at this building a little bit differently. And at this point, we start to lay out the units, the circulation, activity zones, the outside spaces. So we add a little bit of detail to the project so that we know that there's enough space for dining rooms and for multi-purpose rooms or theaters, as well as the connections to the internal space, the back of house spaces. So many times what we're doing is now we've been given the go-ahead and we're developing more and more detail. So our square footage fluctuates an awful lot during this period, where as we notice we want to add something or subtract something, and we're constantly going back and forth between the upper floors and the lower floor, because the upper floors are tight with units, and then any kind of addition or subtraction to that area dictates what happens here on the ground floor. A lot of this has to do with the programming and the operations that the operator or developer is looking for. And so at that time also we are developing where the offices may be, where reception may be. And in this particular instance, it's a motor court rather than the traditional porte-cochere with the roundabout that's at the front arrival court. And then there's actually separate entrances in the back because this is more of a new urbanist type approach in this city. Is this something then that you would take on, and what would you do at this point?
So at this stage, this would allow us, because there's starting to be a fair amount of detail available on the plans, we would actually start to do all of our own internal takeoffs of things associated with the project. I mean, obviously at the very beginning, we would take and do rough square footage analysis of the various spaces, so we could provide an analysis of the different types of spaces, from whether it be rooms, corridor, circulation, or things such as dining, theaters, etc., so that we could then assign costs to those. But however, at the same time, we would start to develop full detailed takeoffs of things such as walls, again, structure areas, and we would start to apply unit prices to those things. So we're starting to refine the estimate at this stage and starting to provide a fair amount of detail that we then can share with the design team and the ownership. This would allow us, as the design is developing then and things are changing, we would be able to update our estimate accordingly and be able to define what's changed as far as quantities of things. So we're starting now to get to a stage that internally we'll do a lot of our own takeoffs and apply, again, cost history to them so that we can start to get a very detailed estimate off of this level.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure at this point too, as we start to introduce more detail and start to think about the exterior, that's something that will help you as well. Some point, we're going to end up starting to put this in the computer, and this is what we will put in. We'll make it start to look more realistic. Here, it's actual digital file that we can translate over to the contractor. Again, probably detailing more or adding more and more detail to the project. And then this coincides with the exteriors so that we can look at, the amount of brick in this case, balconies and so forth. Is this helpful information in schematic design?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we would actually as well use the Revit file as you're developing the Revit file, because we do use the technology to help us with our estimating. So we would actually model it based upon the Revit file, and then we use exterior elevations and studies to develop the cost associated with the various skin types, so that we can then provide feedback based upon, okay, if we were to use brick veneer of this many square feet, it's this type of a cost. Or if we modify that because maybe the cost doesn't allow us to do that, we can then provide the analysis to say, okay, if we could eliminate 25% of the brick area and provide some hardy board siding or some other product, we could then reduce the cost by X. So yeah, this starts to become very, very helpful in helping us define cost even further as you're moving into the schematic design level.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful for the audience to understand the value of having the contractor like Clancy&Theys on the project in schematic design, where a project like this, as we found out, the amount of brick that was on this building, although matched the surrounding neighborhood, realized that the cost that was added to it needed to be reduced. So if we waited until the very end of documentation in order to do value engineering, it would have been a long, tedious project, extra time added to the schedule. But also, by having the contractor on early will allow us to track this and maintain it continuously, so that we could say, well, instead of removing 3/4 of it, can we just maintain it on the front, but let's remove more on the backs? And therefore, I believe you'll be able to take that information and continue to calculate, and perhaps you can reduce the amount of percentage that you have in there for flexibility of design.
No, absolutely. This certainly, again, like I had said, it certainly helps a lot at this stage to have this kind of level of information, to be able to provide the detail within the estimate. And the one thing that it does for us, again, as the design is developing, we can constantly reference back to the previous design, so we can look at what's different and what's changed, and then provide that feedback to the design team along with the ownership, so that the decisions are being made as early as possible. Because as you heard earlier in our presentation, the sooner we can make decisions that affect cost, the much more savings that you'll generate and the more value you get for your project. I would like to take a few moments now to discuss kind of the cost trends that we're seeing in the marketplace for different elements of a senior living facility. The first is an independent living facility. These cost models are based upon what we call a mid-level and a high level. The mid-level generally would be wood frame construction with standard amenities and finishes, targeting more of a moderate income senior. The high level would be generally more on the lines of concrete or heavy structure, along with high-end finishes and luxury amenities, targeting again a higher income senior at this point. So the first element that I would like to talk about is the independent living. In an independent living, the mid-level we're seeing on a low side are running around $142 a square foot to on a high side of $164. And then on the high level, we're seeing $174 a square foot to $218 a square foot. These are based upon, again, the Southeast overall market. The Orlando market specifically, we're seeing to be a little bit different on the mid-level. We're seeing it to be about $134 to $159. Again, I'd be more than happy at any time, if anyone has any interest, to reach back out to discuss their specific market and what the pricing would look like associated with it. The next slide represents cottages. We're starting to see cottages come back again. And one of the things that we're seeing again with similar mid-level to high level, the mid-level range we're seeing being in the $120 to $138 a square foot, with the high level being $168 to $205. Again, the market here in the Orlando market being $108 to $127. On an assisted living level, again, both from a mid-level to a high level, we're seeing the mid-level ranging from $164 to $218. On the high level running from $222 to $268. And again, from the Orlando market, $154 to $200 a square foot. Skilled nursing, we're seeing running from $196 to $231 a square foot at mid-level, and $249 to $312 on the high level. Here in the Orlando market, $177 to $207. We're also seeing now a lot of more elevated structures. So we're starting to see having parking, structured parking under our buildings. So from a perspective of what the cost of the parking would be around $90 to $124 a square foot on the mid-level, and $123 to $158 on the high level, with the Orlando market being in the 77 to 106 range. Again, as I mentioned, I'd be more than happy to follow up with further discussion with anybody related to their specific project and providing them rough order of magnitudes based upon the market conditions of their job.
So as we noted earlier in the presentation, we were going to round out these this last few parts dealing with how to make your community safer than home. A lot of the idea behind this is that, you know, communities trying to get occupancy during these difficult times, you want to provide the perception and the idea that there's certain things that make your community stand out and make it a safer environment for our senior residents. We've gone ahead and identified some different ways that you can do this. There's on this slide, there's particular uses and items that you know we can use to make the community just that much more sanitary and you know deal with the pathogens that might be an issue for potential target residents. And item one here on the left top is a infrared kiosk type system that provides a temperature check that you could provide at the front door just to regulate and make sure that residents or visitors that are coming in are not running fevers and therefore not high risk. Second being ways to sterilize the bottom of your feet. Believe it or not, there's a lot of these pathogens can be trafficked into your community off the bottom of the shoes. So these two different examples will sterilize the bottom of the foot as you enter. And moving on, you've got some different films that are antimicrobial, antiviral that can be applied to surfaces that are high touch. And that goes along with, certain, even furniture, for example, can integrate copper, which has the antimicrobial and antiviral properties that kill that on the surface. You have also cleaning kiosk stations. You know, this one here shows the hand washing station that can be implemented pretty much anywhere. They're portable. Moving on to the bottom left, you've got, you know, dividers for in between, you know, seating areas so that you can provide that screening. And even in your elevators, you can provide, you know, something that sterilizes the air, whether it be UV or one of the other type methods, bipolarization, that as the air circulates, it's actually being sanitized, you know, with killing off these airborne pathogens. Obviously, after that, you've got, you know, your typical screening station, which can be done at your reception counter, and as well as, you know, screening between fitness equipment. You know, this way you can provide that level of safety without having to necessarily space everything out more than need be. Top left, screening in the spa type environment between the pedicure stations. You can have your fixtures be no touch. A lot of the communities have already gone this route so that the surfaces remain clean. You know, they're activated, you know, by movement. And also, you know, the hand drying stations, the toilets, and, you know, moving on to even your doors, your access control, where you wave instead of have to touch a button. The next slide next at the bottom is a type of fixture that actually has a UV light above that the air circulates from the room, and it's sterilized up in the plenum of this fixture and recirculated back down. And lastly, bottom right is one that's a station that can be used for cell phones, keys, things like that nature that, you know, you want to drop on there and, you know, provide that UV sanitation. Here's an example that we've done on one of our communities that's in construction right now. We designed it, you know, to a previous world than where we're at right now, and we wanted to go ahead and see, you know, if there was ways that we can, you know, provide a higher level of safety, you know, given the current conditions. And we've used this particular as an example where on the next slide, we've identified all the different ways with, you know, where this community can become a lot more of a safer than home environment for potential residents. And even if your community is existing, your current residents, there's many ways to be able to improve upon that safety factor with even current technologies. And we would be happy to help, you know, anyone that would like to reach out to us to identify things like this in their communities, in particular, where, you know, there's a plan for retrofitting to deal with the current pandemic, as well as give you you know, like an order of magnitude costing type of analysis, so that you can determine, you know, what seems feasible and what might be just out of reach.
Thanks, Todd. You just heard about the design elements associated with COVID that we're experiencing and the opportunities associated with it. You know, one of the things I'm sure everybody's interested in is, you know, what is it having an effect on the overall construction costs right now with the COVID going on? We're certainly seeing a decrease in construction costs, anywhere from 5 to 8%, possibly even a little bit more with the uncertainty of work. People are becoming a little more aggressive in their pursuit of new opportunity. However, as you saw previously, is, you know, what's going on in the relationship to prevention, and those things are starting to have some increased cost. It depends on the decisions that are made associated with those, to what impact they will have on the overall construction cost. As we mentioned earlier, those do have some increased cost as well. As we're seeing, you know, the uncertainty of material deliveries in the procurement process, we are seeing a delay, anywhere from a 4 to 8 week delay in things such as HVAC, electrical equipment, some flooring and windows. But those things can be monitored early in the process, and they're starting to level out as things are starting to come back online. You know, one of the concerns that we all see is the potential labor shortage and the risk associated with that on site. You know, right now, how long is COVID going to go on? And then what does that mean to the workforce? So as the workforce continues, hopefully we don't see any increased cases. that will then have more impact on projects and create more labor shortage. So our recommendations and takeaway from this is, to anticipate these things associated with projects, such as, some additional time that may be associated with the procurement and the labor shortages associated with a project, but also looking at what active campus measures may be required for working on an active campus.
On behalf of Clancy&Theys and Lantz-Boggio, thanks again for joining us for the presentation this afternoon. Hopefully it was some information you found helpful as you plan through some expansions and renovations to your existing campuses or potentially new campus ventures or expansions. The folks you heard from today are listed here on your screen with all of our contact information. We'd be happy to hear from any of you with any questions that you may have regarding the information we presented. And also if you would like to just talk to us further about some of the things we talked about.